This is DawgNation Postgame, brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Pella Windows and Doors, Cercheros, Lassiter Tractor, White's Pools, the UGA Bookstore, and Jittery Joe's Coffee. Now here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Good evening, Dawg Nation, and welcome into the field here, Everbank Stadium, where Georgia has gotten a 34-20 win over the lousy, stinking Gators of Florida. And listen, it wasn't always pretty, it wasn't always pleasant, but it is always great to be a Gator hater. And Gator haters have another reason to rejoice here tonight as Georgia gets another win against Florida, overcoming a good bit of adversity along the way. We're not going to lie to you tonight. We're not going to sugarcoat it. Carson Beck, after a series of what have not been his best games, came out tonight in a venue, his hometown, a place that he played splendidly a year ago, and he wasn't able to match that performance tonight. Carson Beck struggled. 3 interceptions, 2 of those I think solely are probably, his blame. The third, perhaps some mitigating factors around that. Clearly putting Georgia in another hole with turnovers, as has been a repeated story throughout the season. That happened, that's a fact. But what is also equally true is given the nature of those struggles, given the challenge that comes on the other side of that, this is a Georgia team that found a way to get it done. And frankly, that is the type of thing that Georgia fans ought to be excited about. That's the type of thing that Georgia fans ought to be celebrating here tonight, and that's what we're going to do. We'll talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between from another Georgia win against Florida, and over the course of our time together, we'll try to figure out where it all goes from here. We'll invite you to be a part of that discussion here tonight, too. If you're watching Facebook, YouTube, DawgNation.com, any of those primary video platforms, you can click the link in there, join us via Zoom. You'll have your chance to have your voice heard tonight as we talk about this rivalry win for UGA here in Jacksonville in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We'll also hear from Jeff Sintel later on, his perspective from the field. What did Florida coach Billy Napier have to say about all of this? Perhaps the status of his quarterback DJ Lagway. We'll get a lot of that tonight. Also coming up from Kaylee Manziel, who will be there embedded with the Florida side. But for now, as you've come to love and expect here in our DawgNation Postgame Show, how about a chance to hear from Davin Bellamy on all of this? Davin knows what it's like to be in a hard-fought football game, knows what it's like to have to figure out some way to get it done when perhaps you're just maybe as a team not at your best. And frankly, once again, it sort of felt like Georgia as a team perhaps wasn't at its best, but it still figured out a way to win. So, Davin, let me bring you in on this. First of all, good evening. Thanks for being with us here tonight. What do you make of the fact that Georgia kind of found itself in a deficit, a really bad second quarter, for instance, 10 unanswered points there by Florida, Georgia not able to match that, and yet when Georgia really had to, somehow, some way, it was able to. What did you make of what just unfolded over the course of 60 football minutes before our eyes here over the course of the last few hours?
What's going on, Brandon? I'm trying to find some positives, out of that game. And I guess in my notes, I got down right here that, defense wins championships. So, the positives to pull out of that game is the defense was able to keep the game close in the first half and really keep the game close all game and just get us in striking distance. So, the offense was struggling. And when it comes to championship teams, there's going to be some games where your defense is playing lights out and they're going to have to carry the offense. And there's going to be some games where the defense is not going to be on their A game and the offense is going to have to put up 30-plus points. So I just think the defense has carried majority of the weight. So that's me being very optimistic about what I've seen.
Yeah, I don't think that's a small point because against Texas, what we would say is that Georgia found a way to perhaps play its best defensive game, against at that time number 1 ranked team in the country. Quinn Ewers was getting all kinds of Heisman love, things like that, and yet Georgia went in there and played an outstanding defensive performance against Texas that night. This is a very different level of firepower for Florida, especially after the DJ Lagway injury. But I do think the Georgia defense, for the most part, kind of put its stamp on this game here tonight. And I do believe, perhaps, Davin, if you want to try to, as you say, kind of put the most positive spin possible on this game, which some Georgia fans are going to want to, maybe what you saw tonight were kind of those fragments of a process of reinvention for Georgia, where this team, I think, we assumed, and perhaps at times by the play calling decisions, has been kind of defined by Carson Beck and defined by the passing game. Well, clearly right now that's not working. And if Georgia has any hope of competing for a championship, perhaps some sort of reintroduction of exactly what Georgia's going to be, maybe that's necessary. And maybe tonight we saw some evidence, albeit against a third-string quarterback, but maybe tonight we saw some evidence that this Georgia defense can kind of step to the forefront, perhaps reminiscent of those teams from a couple of years ago. If you're looking for the silver lining, in other words, Davin, I do believe this Georgia defense perhaps provides that.
They definitely do. And, I mean, I'm taking it with a grain of salt simply because when DJ was in the game, they were moving the ball very well down the field. And the things that I mentioned that we can't allow him to do, he was doing it. And that's the big plays and escaping the pocket and extending plays. So, I hope, he returns and his injury is not major. But, I'm kind of taking this with a grain of salt a little bit because, we were playing against a third-string quarterback. And I say that to say we're not going to be playing against a third-string quarterback every week. And I definitely just think, our offense doesn't have to be the most explosive offense in the world, but we just can't keep losing the turnover battle every week. And I don't think people understand when you continue to lose the turnover battle, you put so much stress on your defense to continue to be the fireman and run out on the field and put the fire out. And as you start to try to make this run and you start to get into playoff games, the defense not going to always be able to put the fire out. So, like I say, I'm just trying to be as positive as possible through this win because it is the SEC and it is survive and advance, and you're just at that time of the year where you just want to win.
Well, I think we also are interested in your candid thoughts as well on probably the central figure from the game. That's Carson Beck, another 3-interception performance from him. Davin, I want to leave a lot of space for you to say whatever you want to about this. What are you seeing from Carson right now, and why do you think the results from Carson right now are so different than what they were for most of 2023 in what was then his first year as the starting quarterback?
Right, no doubt. And when I look at, Carson, it's kind of like being a fifth-year guy. The inconsistency is not what you want to see at the quarterback position. DJ for Florida has 6 interceptions and 6 picks. Well, that's what you usually see out of 19, 20-year-old. You don't usually see this out of a guy who sat back and watched and learned and developed and knows the offense. And I just think because the defense is playing so well and we're winning, we're letting them off the hook. But I must say, in Carson's defense, what weapons does he have that are constantly creating separation, winning the one-on-one battles? I mean, a lot of his picks sometimes come off of the ball hitting guys in the hands and them not catching it. Another thing I wrote down on my notes is, our routes aren't crisp. A lot of guys aren't getting separation. On his first pick, you had 2 guys in the same, area. So the picks land on him, but I just think as far as the offensive side of the ball, our weapons and our quarterback are just not on the same page, and that's kind of alarming with how late we are in the season.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of looking at this because, I mean, when folks brought up Carson after the Texas game, Kirby kind of put it back on the receivers for some of the drops and, things of that nature. Now, I don't think there were nearly as many drops here tonight, but perhaps it's not as dynamic of a wide receiver course. Certainly you don't have a Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey guys like you had a year ago, but, if you want to go back and sort of dissect these turnovers, the third one, maybe that's a situation where he just didn't have time to do anything because it certainly looked like a Florida pass rusher was just missed and he was able to kind of get through and get to the quarterback. Maybe you don't put that on Beck. But, boy, those first 2, passes just certainly seemed like they were just bad decisions. I mean, listen, I'm not a player. I'm certainly not a quarterback. I obviously don't have personal experience to call on. That's why we lean on you. But the best that I could tell, it just sort of seemed like that Carson rushed a throw into a very crowded space. In some cases, like what looked like double coverage, made a decision that he probably pretty clearly would like to have had back. And think about the first drive of the game where on that third down play, Cass Jones running a deep passing route did get behind the defensive back, looked like he had a step there, and Carson Beck kind of misfired. So, I agree with you that obviously this is not a Georgia wide receiving core that probably ranks among the best in the country. That's just a fact. And yet I can't help but think that maybe a guy like Carson Beck, who has all the preseason accolades that he has and is kind of the probably, I mean, if you just want to say it this way, you know, the biggest NIL receiver of anybody on the Georgia roster here right now, it certainly seems like there's an opportunity for Beck to make a bigger impact on this offense that he's making, perhaps for Carson Beck to make a bigger impact on these games than he's making here right now. Is that fair to say in your mind?
That's definitely fair to say. And I want to, speak about the two things you said. The first one was, okay, he had a pass rush, so he got the ball out of his hands fast. As a freshman, I'm accepting that excuse. What I learned from being up under Mark Richt was he would always tell Aaron Murray to take what they give you. And if you check the ball down, then you will lead the SEC in passing yardage. And that's what Aaron Murray did. He took what the defense gave him. Well, sometimes when you're a fifth-year quarterback, sometimes taking a sack is the best play. And when I start to see those decisions being rushed, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Davin. I'm sorry. Please finish your point. I didn't mean to. No, that's okay. All I was going to say is let's talk about that point that you just brought up. Yeah, let's talk about that point that you just brought up, which is, okay, so after the third Beck interception, right, where you would assume that his confidence is really lacking and, perhaps at that point in time he maybe needed a shot in the arm, doing the very thing you just described, I thought that Mike Bobo did a really good job of designing a series that allowed Georgia to march down the field and score a touchdown. A lot of that was safe, easy throws. That was the moment in which Georgia took the lead in this game. And then, or I should say, tied this game. And then the touchdown from Cash Jones after that on the miscue from Florida gave Georgia the lead. But at a time in which Carson Beck was clearly probably confidence very much wavering, I thought a much safer game plan, the sort of wide receiver screens like you're describing, some of the throws that almost looked a little bit like what check down might look like. It certainly looked like Georgia when it really had to do something offensively. That's kind of how they built their offense in that second half, right?
Right. I think Bobo did a great job of just reading the flow of the game and started to understand that his quarterback, he's playing in a game where he's from. It's a lot of emotion that he may be a little unsettled right now with all the outside variables and the pressure to play well. So I think kind of what Bobo did was he took the Lambo keys away and kind of gave him the forward focus and said, let's slow this thing down. Let's run the ball and let's get them some easy reads with some screens and let's get the tight ends involved because right now you too riled up to be throwing the ball downfield. So I definitely think Bobo did a great job of kind of reading the energy of his quarterback and started to protect him with the play call.
So let me ask you this, because obviously tonight what Georgia would have wanted to do on the ground was limited because of the fact that Trevor Etienne was battling a rib injury, as we were told on television. You're already down like, Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson, a guy like, Nate Frazier played a lot more tonight. Dwight Phillips even got in towards the end. He got a touchdown. Cash Jones was a big part of the offense tonight. So Georgia was far from fully stocked with its running backs here this evening. So this wasn't maybe the game to see that. But we have seen this year, despite Georgia's struggles in the passing game, they are calling passing plays at a clip that's far higher than any point in time that it's ever been in the Kirby Smart era. Certainly, Davin, go back to your time when you were playing for Coach Smart, nowhere near this many passing plays as a percentage of the overall offense. That's what Georgia's doing right now. But to everyone's eyes, it's just not working now the way that it was supposed to. Is it too late to reinvent this? Is it too late to lean on defense and kind of trust that group to do what they've now done for you a couple of games in a row? Is it too late to find a way to make running backs more a part of this? And, if you go back and look at, kind of what Stetson Bennett was in 2021 and 2022, when at least in that first year on the way to the first national championship, nobody would have thought of Bennett as Georgia's most important player. By the second year, he was a Heisman finalist, and so clearly he was getting more attention. But Bennett was just sort of one of the guys on the team. This wasn't really a quarterback-led team when Georgia first won its national championship under Kirby Smart here in 2021. Is it too late as we kind of move into November for Georgia to kind of reinvent itself, be more about defense, be more about running the football, kind of put the quarterback a little more into the rest of the, I guess the mood and the atmosphere of the team, and maybe not quite so much the focal point of conversation? Can Georgia reinvent itself this late into the season?
I mean, when it comes to this SEC season, it's all about who peaks, at the right time. I think around this time or a little later is when we lost to Auburn, when we were the number one team and they were peaking, and then they kind of declined and we started peaking back up when we got towards the college playoffs and the championship game. So it's never too late to reinvent yourself. I just think we're just stuck at a standstill to where, like we've mentioned so many times doing the show together, is, I don't see that Todd Gurley, that Nick Chubb, that Sonny Michel, just that guy who, and I remember when I was playing, we used to get a ball to Todd Gurley on 3rd and 12 as a white flag surrender, and then he used to get the first down. So we don't have that bell cow running back to take the pressure off the quarterback. So then you have to give the keys to the quarterback. And then, of course, if he's throwing the ball more, it's more susceptible for turnovers. So right now we're just trying to find that balance with Trevor not being there. I kind of like how we used him last week of getting the ball in his hands, not just through hands off, but just with quick screens and lining him up, in the slot. I think we've kind of centered our offense around him. That's what it showed through Texas, because he was touching the ball in so many different ways. When he didn't play, you kind of gave the keys back to Carson. And what we're starting to see is the more attempts that he throws, he feels like he has to win the game. That means he's forcing things or he's pressing a little bit too much early in the game because he has so much of the offense responsibility on him. So right now we're just trying to find that balance. Some games we run the ball well, some games we pass well. So as a whole of the offense, I think as we try to figure out the season, just trying to find consistency. Just finding consistency and, of course, increasing our red zone efficiency. We're getting field goals. We're not getting touchdowns. So, I mean, it's never too late. When it comes to the SEC, it's all about who peaks at the right time.
So let me hit on a couple other topics with you here just for a moment. So on a show like this, we're obviously hyper-focused on Georgia's issues, and clearly they are a team that has some issues. But, Davin, if you broaden this out and look at much of the rest of college football here right now, there's no undefeated team in the SEC here at the moment. Oregon is the number 1 ranked undefeated team right now out of the Big Ten. But the truth is, Oregon had a lot of early season struggles where they certainly didn't look the part of a team that was on its way to winning a national championship. Ohio State's the team that's gotten a lot of the hype, and they obviously beat Penn State here today. But the truth is, they were down 10-0 at one point in time in that game. They've had their share of offensive struggles here this year, too. Is there a chance, and maybe this is just me trying to strike too hopeful of a tone, but is there a chance that some of what we're seeing from Georgia, whether you put the name on it, it's Carson Beck, throwing too many interceptions, or it's not getting the running game going, or not having the elite wide receiver, whatever name you give to the issue, is there a chance that some of this is just college football is a different sport than it was a couple of years ago? And a Georgia team that went undefeated along the way to a national championship in 2022, playing like 13 blowouts in 15 games, and really no one other than Ohio State really came close with Georgia that year. The one-off against Missouri, of course, you got to count that. But for the most part, Georgia was just blowing everybody out that year. Is this just a situation that Georgia's not doing that this year because really nobody's doing that and the sport is just kind of wide open right now, and that Georgia's issues don't make it all that different than any of these other teams that are also competing for a national championship right now?
Well, when I was with Coach Smart, he always said this, it's never what anyone else is doing, it's what we're doing. And right now, the mistakes that Georgia is making, or just the things that we're doing, we're not used to seeing. Like I said, we're used to being able to punch the ball in the red zone just by out physical teams. And we didn't settle for so many field goals. And we always been a team that was, predicated on winning the turnover battle and not allowing explosive plays. I just think some of it is the youngness of our defense. But I wouldn't blame that on the college football because, in my opinion, talent has always been there. What separated Saban from all those other teams was, Georgia always had good recruiting classes. But what separated us to coaching, I still think we have the best coach in college football right now, and Georgia still knows how to win. If you notice in that game, Florida doesn't know how to win, so they lost the game. So they did the routine thing. They messed it up. They messed up a field goal attempt, something that should be routine. That's just a team that doesn't have championship DNA, doesn't have the winning pedigree of knowing how to win, which is a skill. I think Georgia has that more so than any other team. And I just think we just have to focus on being more consistent because we do have the better teams. We're just doing things that are out of our nature.
So let me finish up with this with you, Davin, then we'll start taking some calls and getting folks involved in the conversation here. I think the other thing that comes to mind is you and I talked about this a little bit on DawgNation Daily when you joined me this week, that your time at Georgia, a part of a tremendous transformation of the Georgia program where when you had come into Georgia, Georgia was in the midst of a series of several consecutive losses to Florida. And not only that, the previous couple of decades had been mostly Florida wins here in this series. And yet tonight you watch, Florida has the special teams miscue. That's the weird thing that happens that kind of benefits Georgia, whereas it seems like for many years those sort of weird bounces always kind of went against UGA and benefited Florida. Tonight, Georgia getting to take advantage of that. And it's Georgia who's putting a winning streak in this series together, winning every year since 2021. And then, of course, prior to that, the 2020 season in 17, 18, and 19, getting those wins too. For Kirby Smart, a lot of success here against Florida, completely rewriting the story of this rivalry compared to where it was before he got here. As someone who is a part of this buildup that now continues today of a situation where we may have some issues with how Georgia played, but we don't have an issue with Florida getting a chance to celebrate here on this field and try to rub it in our faces they got the win. Like, how gratifying is it for you that somehow, some way, the tradition of success against Florida that Kirby Smart has started still continues on?
Well, it's definitely an honor, really. I didn't know that that was the stat until you guys brought it up, that we kind of started the streak of winning against Florida. But I just love that, a lot of people always say, our class was the class that got things rolling. And if you even take that down to a smaller thing, we kind of was able to get things rolling in the Florida series also. And I just think, that team that came back just had a different type attitude because no one expected anything out of us. And now we're rolling. So these guys kind of now, they're used to winning. Some of the guys on the team have rings. We wanted to taste that success and that fame that came with winning that these guys have now. So I just think just the passion that we took into that last year and just in the fashion that we beat them. And I always love throwing this stat into, some Florida, teammates I've had of you didn't cross the 50 until the second string came in. That's one of the craziest stats I've ever had playing all my years of football. So just the domination, we showed the young guys who allowed them to cross the 50 and allowed them to get 7 points. We were pissed off. So those guys who were young then, we trained those puppies. And now they understood that, and just to see that rollover, it's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing indeed, Davin. We appreciate that. A lot to like about tonight's win, some things to be concerned about. College football often gives you a little bit of both, and it certainly did that for Georgia here tonight. We appreciate your analysis of all that. We'll see you this week coming up on DawgNation Daily. Of course, next week, a big one for Georgia against an Ole Miss team that looked awful good today against Arkansas. I'll enjoy the discussion with you about that throughout the week, including game day next Saturday. Davin, thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
I'll see you Wednesday, Brandon. Just win, baby.
That's right. Good stuff from Davin Bellamy there. And listen, I think that Davin lays out a pretty realistic assessment of this. You heard, Davin wasn't exactly sunshine and rainbows about everything that he saw from Georgia here tonight. And obviously I get that. I believe as we start kind of rolling through calls, I think a lot of Georgia fans are going to say the same type of thing. And yet, I'm going to be right there with you. We can have an honest conversation about what we saw from Carson Beck tonight and why it hasn't been better this season and where the blame lies with that or how it gets better, perhaps a better discussion of how you improve on that going forward. But at the same time, I'm also not going to apologize for the fact that I love beating Florida. And even if they lost the quarterback to injury, and even if Georgia, didn't exactly look pretty for a long stretch in this game, better to be talking about all this stuff after another win against Florida than the absolute sheer misery that we would have had to endure if Billy Napier, the guy that couldn't open a water bottle, if he's the guy that gets a win against Georgia, or if, some dude named Warner, third-string quarterback, if he got that. Thank goodness that Georgia found a way to get that done. And listen, if this was their game to play that their starting quarterback, then that's a little bit of payback for 2005 when Georgia came here and played without DJ Shockley, or all the other strange things that have happened throughout the years. No apologies from me on any of this stuff. As Davin said there a moment ago, it is just win season. It is a time now when you don't apologize, you don't excuse make, you collect your win and you move on, and that is exactly what Georgia did. And yet at the same time, there's also that, I think, justifiable discussion of, okay, well, but what do you take from this game that perhaps, preserves the opportunity for even more wins in the future? Very, very tough November stretch. We'll obviously get to that when it relates to Ole Miss and Tennessee. And the honest truth is, listen, this just may not be a Georgia team that wins the national championship. They may not do it. They may have a season-ending loss here coming up at some point in time. It is at least a possibility, given the way you saw them play a lot tonight, matching some of what you've also seen from Georgia here this season. That just may be the case. But until that happens, I'm going to try my best to enjoy myself the best that I possibly can. And we'll talk about how Georgia gets better. We'll kind of zero in on some of the key names in all of this tonight. That's Carson Beck. We'll do all of that. But we're going to find a way to just appreciate the fact that for another week anyway, the success that Georgia has had in this rivalry in particular, it does live on. So click the link, be a part of the show. We'll get your comments in here. We're going to get those screened up and get you on the air here, and we'll get you talking about all of this here tonight. Let me also bring in Jeff Sintel here too. Jeff, I'll get the perspective there on the field. Jeff, we'll let you swing around here on this side. We'll start taking some of these calls here tonight there as well. Joseph and Griffin, you're next up here tonight on the DawgNation Postgame Show. We're live at Everbank Stadium in Jacksonville. Georgia wins 34-20. Joseph, what did you think about it?
Hey, Jeff. Hey, BA. Hey, I'm glad y'all are on tonight. Yeah, we had, we got to stop beating ourselves. We keep beating ourselves all the time. That game should have been, we should have blew them out with the third-string quarterback. I'm glad that I hope the other quarterback is all right. The game might have been a little different. He has played the whole game. But we got to start shooting ourselves in the foot. These interceptions, like Bellamy was saying earlier, the turnover ratio is getting out of hand. And the defense is playing their hearts out and carrying the team. But eventually it's going to catch up with us. We got a tough game coming up against Ole Miss next week. We're playing them down there in Ole Miss. And Ole Miss put a whooping on Arkansas today. So we got to do better. We got to do better. If the team want to get what they want to get to, the offense got to do better. Got to do better. Got to stop doing all these turnovers. And hopefully we will. And we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Joseph, I think it's a really fair point. It's a very fair call. We're going to let Jeff Sintel respond to what some of you had to say in a moment. Let me also remind folks, as our DawgNation Postgame Show rolls on tonight, one of our great sponsors, the UGA Bookstore. 2 weeks from now, we'll get a chance to be back in Athens after what we think is going to be a huge game coming up against Tennessee. Hope to see you at the UGA Bookstore there for that. And if you want to get ready for a big run through the month of November for these Dogs, great-looking UGA apparel to get ready for all of that. Our friends at the UGA Bookstore, they help you out with all of that, too. They can get you looking sharp. You can shop online, UGABookstore.com. You can go right there next to the Tate Student Center across from Sanford Stadium and get all the UGA apparel that you need. And don't forget, for the next big Georgia game day, as happens every Georgia game day, a lot of tremendous autograph signings. The UGA Bookstore continues to do all of that. So go to their website, UGABookstore.com, and find out who's going to be there and how you can be a part of game days at the UGA Bookstore, including our DawgNation Postgame Show after the game, second floor next week from the UGA Bookstore. So Joseph, I think, does a really good job of kind of laying out right now what's going on with Carson Beck, Jeff, and I'll bring you on this discussion. And tonight, for me, was one of those moments in which I think that the Beck talk probably goes from being kind of a quiet thing on sort of the periphery of what's happening around Georgia to perhaps something that's a little bit more at the heart of the matter here right now for a couple of reasons. On this field in this stadium a year ago, Beck arguably had one of his best games of the entire year. Now, the stat line for him tonight ends up looking good, and to his credit, he did play much better after that third interception. I'd also say that a lot of that was pretty safe routes designed to, perhaps minimize the lack of confidence that the quarterback would have had after those interceptions, and frankly, not giving him a chance to put it back in harm's way again. I think that's probably smart play calling by Mike Bobo to treat him that way. The point is I think that the Beck conversation went up another level tonight, where I think if you're going to be as honest and candid as you can be about Georgia here tonight, you have to talk about that in some respect, Georgia's kind of winning in spite of its quarterback.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Brandon. I think the way to say this is something is going on with Carson Beck, because I think Georgia, here's a good example. Post-game media session, right? They brought the players out to a table this time, 3 players to a table. They gave Carson about 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Then they released him, and then they went on to 2 other players. You don't really see that a lot. And, of course, my thoughts there are they're trying to protect him from an extended 10, 12-minute media scrum, which what he normally sees. Kirby was very candid. He again protects his quarterback, but he just says Carson is making some throws late over the middle. He just can't make. I think this game today, it's not Carson's game so much as it a guy like Arian Smith, a guy like Cash Jones, a guy like Benjamin Jurasic, who's seemingly getting better. There is a problem right now with Carson Beck. I will address that by saying, Brennan, there's a real worry next week when points are going to be at a premium. How does this Georgia team, without turnovers, without special teams, without short fields, how does Georgia get to 25, 28, 30 points against an Ole Miss team that can score?
We'll keep the conversation going. Gavin and Hazelhurst, you're next up here tonight on our DawgNation Postgame Show. Gavin, how about them Dogs? Georgia wins, but obviously some concerns. What did you make of what you saw here in Jacksonville? Gavin, are you there? All right, we'll try that again. Let's get our buddy William Camacho. William, you're next up here on our DawgNation Postgame Show. William, thanks for being here tonight. What'd you see from the game?
Hey, you can hear me now? Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with Carson. I mean, I don't know if he has mental issues going on with him, or he's just not. The first half was the worst performance. Second half, he just came and started playing a little bit better, but I don't know if it's mental or I don't know. I'm just he can't continue like this. I mean, he just can't. I mean, our defense is playing well, and
No, I think you're absolutely right about that, William, and I appreciate the call. That, look, here's the thing. I'm gonna mix metaphors with other sports here for a moment. Sometimes a pitcher in baseball doesn't have his best stuff. He's just got to try to find a way to get outs, right? You'll take a ground ball. You'll do whatever you can. You'll just find some way to get outs. And I think that all of us need to – I'm going to try to be careful how I say this. All of us need to be mindful of that with Carson here too, that you can be disappointed in the pile-up of interceptions. And we'll show you graphics on the screen tonight that kind of tell you the story of just how many of those there have been and how different of a stat line that's producing for Beck here in 2024. All of that's honest. But, Jeff, if you're a Georgia fan, I do think you got to understand, you still need Carson. I mean, and listen, I think that Gunnar Stockton has a very bright future at UGA, but I still believe that Beck is the best option right now. I do. And, you know, I haven't heard a peep about Jaden Rashada since he's been here. I don't think that's an issue. I don't think that's an option here right now. And Ryan Puglisi is coming back off of injury. So you can like a lot of the future quarterback depth that Georgia has. I don't believe that's a solution here for this year unless somebody's really kind of just thrust in there because of injury. So we can be real. Carson Beck is not playing well right now, but you got to leave some space for him to play better. You got to leave some space for him to do a little bit of what he did tonight, which is make safer, shorter throws, not quite as risky, and making a series of good decisions that allowed Georgia to get the touchdown that brought this game back to even, and then created the opportunity for Cash Jones to get the touchdown that gave Georgia the lead. You got to give some space for Beck to do some of that kind of stuff. We can be as honest as you want to about what it's not been, but if this team is going to have any chance of making a push towards the playoffs, I still think Carson Beck's got to be the guy, and Georgia fans have got to leave a little bit of space for him to perhaps grow into that role a little bit more.
What is Georgia football, Brandon, all about now? What is this team trying to do every season now?
We're trying to win a national championship, right?
The only way you win the national championship this year is if you get Carson right. That's the only way to say it. So you've got to fix him. You've got to help him. And it's not about rotating quarterbacks. It's about confidence. It's about getting him. I thought, first of all, Bobo had a very delicate moment in this game when Carson in the passing game was leaking. It was sputtering. It was stuttering. And they did go to those safe calls. They did go to those checks. And even, Brandon, some of those checks, Carson was still off on some of those checks. But I thought there was a really good script of plays they put together. They had to utilize Carson. They had to utilize Nate Frazier a lot more. They had to utilize, because, Etienne goes out with a rib injury. And, frankly, there's two things in my mind as I'm walking over here I want to think about. Man, there's a lot of warts. The run defense, the perimeter run defense, the tackling, Carson, there's a lot of things. But there's a little perspective here that I got to say. They haven't beaten Florida 4 times since 1983. I don't know if you had that tone at the beginning of the show.
Sure, for sure.
But I got to remember it's really hard. Now, folks, I could build a case where Georgia probably should have lost that game. They lost the turnover battle. Florida's starting quarterback went out of the game, and Florida still makes it a 20-20 game. Georgia loses its starting tailback in this game as well. You want to talk about leaking a program kind of wobbly right there. That was it. And, a lot of Georgia teams, they would have lost this game, Brandon. They would have. That's why Georgia hasn't won 4 straight in this series. But to make the point crystal clear, the only way you win a national championship is if you get Carson Beck playing like he did a year ago.
Let me get Brandon in Covington. Brandon, you're next up here in our DawgNation Postgame Show. Brandon, what'd you think about Georgia here tonight?
Hey, Brandon. Hey, Jeff. I appreciate you guys having me on. Just a few things. I think we got to understand, too, Georgia needs to find their identity. I know that sounds kind of crazy late in the season, but I feel like they're still trying to get the identity passed from the past teams that Georgia has rolled out in the past before. In particular, like the 2021 defense where, they were dominant. They need to find their identity, not the past, the present. Also, with Beck's struggles, I would love to see more of Gunnar Stockton. Mixing it in with the RPOs, maybe pulling Beck out, bringing him in, kind of getting the RPOs, maybe some runs with him, some QB reads. Would love to see some of him in there, see what we can do. Look, I said this in the comments. Sometimes you just got to sit the quarterback. I mean, hate to say this, Saban pulled a starter out in the Natty game of all games, took that chance, which I get the backup was a 5-star quarterback. But sometimes you just need a fresh set of legs or a fresh mindset. When Beck's in there and he's struggling, maybe he's thinking, okay, I don't have the connections with these guys like I need them. I don't know if I can trust them. Maybe just a fresh set of legs on a couple plays. It doesn't even have to be a whole drive. Maybe just a couple of plays, let Beck come to the sidelines and realize, maybe I just need to get out of my own head. Also, too, people got to understand there was a lot of holding from Florida that was not called in tonight's game on the outside perimeter of the defense. Yeah. Ever since this year, I've been kind of iffy. I noticed a lot of calls not going our way, and I feel like that has been an upward trend. But I really do think that. And the defense run game has to be more.
Yeah, Brandon, I appreciate the phone call. Yeah, no, Brandon, I appreciate the phone call. I think you bring up a lot of really good points. Let me address a couple of the things that you just mentioned there, and let me start with the Gunnar Stockton part of this. And look, this is one of those things where I think the conventional wisdom of those like me and you who are fans is very, very different than the conventional wisdom, not just of Kirby Smart, but all coaches. Coaches do not like to introduce the idea of doubt into a locker room when it comes to quarterback. Remember, the other night when Steve Sarkisian took out Quinn Ewers and put in Arch Manning for that series, he was universally criticized by a lot of the football community of what do you do when you're being reckless with your quarterbacks here right now. Now, it could be that all of the kind of quote-unquote like sort of insiders in the establishment, maybe they're wrong, and maybe a team is not quite so fragile that you can't, put a quarterback on the bench for a minute. Steve Spurrier used to do it, for instance, on a field like this a lot with Terry Dean and Danny Werfel and guys like that. Maybe teams aren't quite so fragile. Maybe they can handle a little bit of that. But most coaches are like Kirby Smart. Smart, when he speaks about this, and we'll hear from Kirby before our show is done, they don't even go in the direction of anything other than, I've got total confidence in my quarterback. Absolutely. Privately, is Kirby a little concerned about Carson? You have to believe he probably is. He's just a human being. We probably all are. Is he ever going to let on to any of that? My guess is he probably won't. And in fact, I'm curious. If Beck threw a fourth interception tonight, do you think they would have considered taking him out then?
I don't think so. And it would depend. Because, one of the things Kirby said in his post, and I'll summarize because it'll come, but he said he's a guy that can make unbelievable throws. He's the guy that can make out-of-this-world throws. He referenced another big third-down conversion he made. He referenced just the way that offense feels around him. He even marginalized one of the interceptions, Brandon. He said we got to protect better because Carson got hit on that interception.
And I believe that's true, too. I believe that's true.
That's purely football right there. And, a lot of people will look into it. People ask Carson all those questions in the post-game 5 minutes. They said, you think you press a little bit too much because you're in Jacksonville for this game? And I don't know about that question, Brandon, because he's had these issues in Texas, Alabama, and Jacksonville. Carson responded that this is a dream. This is his dream to play in this game. I think there's a lot of pressure. And one of the things, the way this game unfolded is I think we all went into this game this season, Brandon, thinking that, Carson's going to play like a first-round pick. Carson's going to play a little bit better than last year. He's going to be up for a Heisman. He's going to be up for that number one pick consideration. And it's really not been that. And a day like today, Georgia's pieces, Georgia's team, Cash Jones, Benjamin Jurasek, Arian Smith. I don't know if you've spoken about it yet, Brandon, but C.J. Allen made a terrific play where the guy behind him was open. If he doesn't go, super Air Jordan on that one right there, Georgia's in a little bit more trouble. The thing that bothers me a lot about this game is, Georgia has a 2020 lead. They take 2013 lead. Florida's down to its backup third-string quarterback because he is his third string because that Lagway was the second string. And they allow Florida to come back and tie the game. That is atypical of a Georgia team, especially the runs. And I think at that point, Georgia, Kirby even said in the postgame, Brandon, he's like, man, here we go again. It's tied. We got to make a play. We got to score. And that was that pressure moments. He still, Brandon, defends his quarterback as he should. But at that podium, he's like, we had to have it there, and Carson delivered. And that's why he's our guy.
You mentioned C.J. Allen. Let's go ahead and make him our player of the game, presented by our friends at Serve Pro. Of course, Serve Pro, restoration specialist, mess to clean up. You're right now on the field behind us. They're cleaning up all the water bottles and all the debris that falls in the field during the game. If you've got fire damage, water intrusion, things like that, you want that cleaned up too. Our folks from Serve Pro can get that done for you, and they can make it put all back together like it never even happened. That's what Serve Pro is all about. Every franchise independently owned and operated. So check out the restoration specialists of Serve Pro if you've got a big job and a big cleanup that needs to take place. Congratulations to C.J. Allen, our Serve Pro player of the game. Before I go back to the phones, let me very quickly say one more thing, which is this is what Brandon also brought up in his call a moment ago. The notion that Georgia, and I talked to Davin Bellamy about this just a few minutes ago, is still in the process of perhaps trying to identify itself and perhaps reinvent itself. The weird thing is, for all the talk about Beck struggles, this is a Georgia team that throws it far more than any team ever in the Kirby Smart era. There is such an imbalance there between what we think that Georgia should be doing and what it's actually deciding to do during a game. Continually going back out there and passing at a rate that almost no one would say is a championship-level run-to-pass ratio. That is even more perplexing given the fact that the passing game has had so many struggles. Is it too late for Georgia to now reinvent itself and put a little bit better run-pass balance together?
I think they're going to have to figure it out, Brandon. They're going to have to try to because, the thing with Carson struggling was, hey, just run the ball. Well, Brandon, the game I was watching, Georgia couldn't run the ball on Florida. They had trouble running the ball, and that reverted them to, let's face it, it was a lot of screens. It was a lot of those extended handoffs Kirby likes to talk about. And he says just we got to help him more, Brandon. And, previous weeks they're not catching the football. Now Carson is making bad decisions, throwing the ball late over the middle. He threw one down the sideline, which was a jump ball ball. He's like, you can't have that. You can't do that. I feel like, Brandon, they're trying to find the identity. A great example is they go with Nate Frazier today. He has 18 carries, his career high, because they have to, because they have no Trevor Etienne. And he makes a play, but then he makes a freshman composure mistake. And a lot of people on Twitter, you're a lot more forgiving. You're like, I'm fine with the Gator chomp. I'm fine with the throat slash. Well, I saw this. His Georgia teammates, Lawson Lucky, shut that stuff down quickly. And then if Lawson did a job, Kirby Smart certainly did a job. It's a composure thing there. He's like, everybody loves Nate. It's an immature moment. He's got to grow up. Georgia's better than, he said, we're a meat and potatoes program. We're not that extravagances of the Gator chomp and the throat slash.
Let me get Zach in Wisconsin. Zach, you're next up here tonight on our DawgNation Postgame Show. Zach, what'd you think? 34-20. Some Georgia fans, though, are concerned.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for having me on. My whole childhood, I'm 36. I was used to getting abused by the Gators. So honestly, Beck didn't play as clean of a game as we would like him to have played. But I think he's earned the benefit of doubt to at least go into next week having a shorter leash. Everyone's talking about bench Beck, do this, do that. While I'd love to see Gunner play, I think Beck, he's paid his dues while he's been a dog. He stuck it out behind Stetson. He could have flown the coop and gone wherever he wanted. Think he's having some growing pains right now. I want to stick with the guy, at least, give him a half next week. Today, he made some bad throws. Those are egregious interceptions that he thrown. But I think he may have been in his own head. At the end of the day, though, a 2-touchdown lead or, win over the Gators, the lousy stinking Gators, as Brandon calls them, I'll take it.
Hey, I agree with it, Zach. I appreciate that. And I do think what Zach says, Jeff, is really and I appreciate the phone call, Zach. I think that's appropriate that in the midst of all of this, it's still another win against Florida. And I am happy about that. And, folks, as I've said, I'm not going to apologize for that at all. As imperfect as it was, it still feels great to walk out of this stadium a winner again because I'm a lot like Zach. My childhood, in a lot of cases, I don't want to say my childhood was ruined. That's a little more dramatic than I wanted it to be. But a lot of my nights as a child and as a teenager and into my 20s, a lot of those nights were ruined by, this bunch. It's one of the reasons why I call them the lousy, stinking Gators, because they made life pretty miserable for me, at least from a football standpoint, for quite some time. So I don't want to lose sight of that we're going to talk about some issues for Georgia to clean up, but we're going to get the chance and the privilege, frankly, to talk about that out of a win. Of course I'm happy about that.
Brandon, it's kind of cleaning up issues after a win. And I don't know, there's a lot of folks that listen and watch that they've only really seen Kirby and Richt. And I came up in an era, Brandon, where Georgia lost 12 out of 13 in this building right there. Think of that for a second. And we're talking about cleaning up after a win. And, that's a big perspective point. Yeah, I think a lot of people notice what's wrong with the Georgia football team right now. It's not what it used to be. I will say this. The players, you want to know how they feel? They feel like when it's the fourth quarter, it is their game. They have confidence. They feel like they're an anaconda that's going to snuff out the life and choke out the life of the opponent. You listen to Jalen Walker afterward, Dylan Bell afterward. Heck of a catch there for Dylan today, man. I don't know if you –
Oh, yeah.
That was almost like, is this going to be another interception for Carson? And then Dylan snatches it. This is the second straight game he's made a big pivotal play like this in the Georgia-Florida series, Brandon. There's a lot of ills, but you watch that locker room, you listen to those players, and I just don't think it's the company line or putting on a good face or lipstick on a pig, Brandon. They genuinely believe that they're taking these shots across the bow, and they still win, they move forward. Carson said something that was very interesting, is he said, man, this was a huge game, big game. Guess what? Big game next week. Bigger game the following week. Another big game next week. He's like, this is what you come to Georgia for, to be placed under this amount of scrutiny, spotlight, and I would call it pressure.
We're going to get a chance to hear from Georgia quarterback Carson Beck in a moment. What did Beck think about all of this? I believe we also have, is it Gavin and Hazelhurst? We have Gavin and Hazelhurst standing by. Gavin, you're next up on our DawgNation Postgame Show. Gavin, go ahead.
Hey, BA. Appreciate you taking my call. One of those games where you get up from the couch and you look and there's sweat stains on the couch. So, but a win's a win, no matter what. My question is, why aren't we a second half team? No, why does it keep on going? I feel like ever since Stetson Bennett stepped on the field, from that point on to now, we're a second-half team. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think tonight, one of the things that I appreciate the phone call, Gavin, one of the reasons tonight that Georgia was forced to be a second-half team, it's not just the interceptions, but on the opening drive of the game, Cash Jones running a deep receiver route, he got behind a defensive back, and this is kind of one of the lost moments in the game because it doesn't really go down to the stat sheet, but, some of Beck's misfires on incompletions are, frankly, almost as bad as some of the interceptions because that was a touchdown. And if you score in your opening possession there, I think that gives you a little bit of a different feeling about the game. But, I don't want to pile on him because I really do think that, Georgia's best chance to make a run into December and January is obviously with Carson Beck. But, part of the issue that Georgia was forced to be a second-half team again today was not just because of the Beck interceptions. It was some of the misfires on plays that had a chance to be made.
You know what it felt like to me? It felt like that deep shot they made to Arian against Alabama, and that was one that Georgia's fortunes were going to rise and fall at the beginning on that play, and it was an overshot. If Georgia makes that play, Carson's got a huge jolt of confidence. They go in and score. It's one of those things right now. There's a pendulum right now with Carson Beck, and I think it's shaky. I think you're not finding – I still don't think he's adjusted well in not having a guy like Ladd and Brock, but those guys are in the NFL. But he has got to figure out what he can do within the confines of this offense. Delp had a better game today. A lot of the supporting characters.
He also had a great – Delp had a big catch on the final drive of this game and had a great block on Dominic Lovett's touchdown. So shout out to number 4 on that.
You saw a little bit more of Lovett, but you also saw Georgia, again, it feels like taking shots across the bow. They lose Micah Morris early. They shuffle in Tate Ratledge. They kind of go back and forth with a lot of this. And I tell you, Brandon, the one of the things that will stick with me, Florida was down to its third quarterback. They lost DJ Lagway, and I thought that game should have been over by then. And again, you keep turning the ball over in the SEC, and a team's going to hang around.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. I want to let you hear Carson Beck. What did he think about his own performance? As Jeff said, perhaps conspicuously short media availability, a little bit of a different kind of relationship right now for Beck when it comes to that kind of thing. But what did he think about it? We're going to let you hear that. Also, before that, quick pause. It's 60 seconds. I thank a couple of sponsors here for their involvement in our postgame show. Then live from Jacksonville, we'll let you hear Carson Beck. After that, quick 60-second break. Then we're right back to it, including the words of Carson Beck right here in our DawgNation postgame show.
When you've got to haul, when you've got to mow, when you've got to feed, whatever you've got to do, whatever you've got to do, you've got to get a John Deere. Whether you're working at home or on the farm, the team at Lassiter Tractor Company can help you find the right product for you. Find your local dealer at LassiterEQ.com.
Big games deserve every day. Cerchero's Catering can handle the crowd, so it's perfect for your tailgate or watch party. Order online, pickup, or delivery. Cerchero's is Georgia grown with over 30 locations throughout the state, bringing you fresh mix, bowls, burritos, tacos, and more, with over 25 fresh toppings, customizable, just the way you like it. So find a location near you at Cercheros.com. That's Cercheros.com.
DawgNation Postgame is sponsored by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Pella Windows and Doors, and the UGA Bookstore.
And as promised, we're back here live, Everbank Stadium in Jacksonville. Georgia wins 34-20. A lot of celebration about another victory against Florida. Some concerns, though, about 3 interceptions tonight from Carson Beck. How did Carson Beck himself view his performance? This is what he told the media a few moments ago.
I think I was settled down from the jump.
All right, so a little bit of an issue there with Carson Beck on that. You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page, and you'll be able to see that. So system kind of froze up on us there a bit, so we're not able to bring that to you with Carson Beck here right now. Jeff, did you get a chance to hear from Carson? Can you paraphrase some of what you heard from him?
Yeah, a lot of what he kept talking about was, this game, it was his dream. And listen, everybody was like, how do you, when you make these interceptions, how do you reset? And he's like, speaking mentally, he's like, I gotta trust my players around me. I got to not try to do too much. He says, I take it on myself. He said, I take great ownership. Carson feels like even Kirby said that he takes great ownership of this team and how it does well and how it does not do well. And, Carson is one of those guys where he's like, this is tough. I turn the ball over. I'm making it harder. But he says, this is what he said. He had a very telling statement, Brendan. He said, our offense basically doesn't get stopped except when I throw an interception. Georgia did pile up the yards today, but he's acknowledging, what's going on. And, Brandon, there's one thing about him. I think he threw 7 interceptions all last year. He's at 12 now. Georgia throws the ball a whole lot more than ever before. So it's a little misguided stat to sit there and say no Kirby quarterback has ever thrown as many interceptions as Carson. But again, was this week 8, week 9? So we're not even really – we still got at least a third of the season left. So it's a problem, Georgia turning the ball over. I don't know about you, Brandon. It's almost to the point now when Carson Beck dropped back last year, you thought, he's going to tear somebody up. Who's he going to find? Who's he going to put it on? And now it's like, please don't make a mistake. Please don't throw an interception. I think the confidence thing there is something he's got to fix.
Let's go back to phones here. Isha's next up in Texas, checking in on our DawgNation Postgame Show. Isha, always glad to hear from you. All right, we'll get Isha here coming up in just a moment. So while we're waiting to get back to the phones, let me also say this. I know that some people are going to be a little critical of the final touchdown that Florida scores, kind of set up, by Georgia perhaps giving up some stuff on the ground here. I don't mind saying this full stop. I thought this was a good night for the Georgia defense. I really did. And listen, I don't care a rip that it's Florida's third-string quarterback. Honestly, there are a lot of backup quarterbacks playing all over the sport. That alone is not enough to dismiss a performance here tonight. And this, to me, did provide remnants of what you also saw from Georgia against Texas. And that was, I think, in anybody's estimation, a good performance of the Georgia defense. So, certainly this game did not end when it could have. Georgia had a chance to kind of sweep the leg and sort of end the night. Did not do that. Defense obviously played some role in that. But if this defense doesn't bow its back for most of the afternoon into the evening, this probably is a Georgia loss. And so from that standpoint, I'm glad C.J. Allen get the game ball or a player of the game. I could sort of give a game ball, so to speak, to the Georgia defense overall. Once again, like a lot of things with Georgia right now, it's not perfect, but certainly a unit that's stepping to the forefront here right now at a time which somebody's got to do that for Georgia.
I think they give up 228 yards. It's hard to bellyache about that, even with the ills, the warts of it. But let me ask you a question, Brandon. What do you think Georgia does really well right now? I'm having a hard time putting my finger on what I think Georgia does really well if it's not special teams. What do you think? What's your answer to that question?
Well, here's what I'll say, and I mentioned this on the radio this morning. So right now, this is obviously a struggling offense, but when you look at holding a Clemson team that's been a kind of a top 10 offense ever since that moment, they held them that day to 3 points. They went into Texas at a 23-0 lead at the half and played well enough defensively. That game was never really seriously in doubt other than the one brief momentum swing in the second half. This is a better defense than it was in 2023. Not as good as it was in 2022 and certainly not as good as it was in 2021, but Georgia's defensively in 2024 better than it was in 2023. So if you want to talk about a December-January type run, then more of what you saw some tonight, a lot against Texas, that's kind of it right now. This is a better Georgia defense than it has been.
I feel like my answer to that question, Brandon, I had to do some thought searching and thought bubbles on that one. I think when they're healthy, especially on defense, they're a formidable unit. And, again, we've got to think about this because it is the football game. No Jonah Aguero. No Dirty Dan Jackson in the first half. Did you notice in the first half when I think Ja'Cory Thomas also went down and they had to shift some players around, a lot more Chris Cole here as well? I think when Georgia gets extended or Georgia gets kind of pressured, it's when, let's face it, we saw it with the defensive line this year. We saw it when they're missing guys in the back end. But sometimes, Brandon, there was a play that Kirby Smart got on Malachi their first touchdown in Florida, I think that was on Malachi. And you're like, sometimes Georgia's best guy, is not the unbelievable undefeated champion at times.
Now let's go back to the phones. Isha's ready to go. I believe Isha may be coming on our DawgNation cruise too. I think he said that one time before. Isha, do I have that right? Are you coming on the DawgNation cruise this year?
Yes, I am. I will be on the cruise this year. One of many I'm going on. But
you're a good man, Isha.
That'll be the third cruise of the year when I go on that one.
You're a good man.
I
love it. What'd you think about the game tonight?
Well, I'm pretty much in part with everybody else was saying. Well, first of all, hello, BA and everybody. I know it's been a while since I've been on here. I've been trying to catch up some of them. I've been a little busy when I come on here to talk or to get on video. I just been listening most of the time. And some of the year, I didn't want to actually go through and hear anything because all the negative Nancy sometimes, which they do have a point, but at some point you got to realize you got to realize the scheme of things. As far as tonight, good win, way to beat them. The best part I say about it was once we got our guys back defensively, we was able to shift back into normal mode. And I did think they changed up their defense's scheme because of that. You could see it. Well, at least I could. And offense, I made it in the comments earlier that I think because of what Florida did, they only rushed so many, and then they dropped everybody back in that zone. That's what caught us is bad play calling through zone coverage, where we had no crossing routes to get the eyes of the defenders. Most of it was kind of one player making a move here and there, and that was it. You didn't see a whole lot of. Did you see a whole lot of crossing routes in there to get the defense of guys looking outside their zone? That's how you beat a zone. And I knew that prior to it, Florida had a good defensive line. They were fast. So some of those little plays, I was hoping that they'd be careful on and not throw a pick like we had last week. But to be careful on that and to just block downfield. We did a little better blocking downfield with that. We didn't get a lot of yards, but we just positive yards at any yards. You know, so I think because of that scheme.
I think we lost Isha, but I think that's a great point, Isha. I think it's a really good phone call. Isha, I think that's a really good point and a really good phone call. I always love your breakdown of kind of what you saw there, and all of our folks who are joining us tonight as a part of our DawgNation Postgame Show. Good stuff from him. We're also going to get good stuff here coming up from Kirby Smart. Kaylee Mansell had a chance to hear from Billy Napier. She's going to tell us about that. Jeff, how about a final thought from you of what you saw from Georgia? And then when I ask you about something else here, too, before we say goodbye to you, anything else from this field tonight specifically related to Georgia?
I mean, they've reached the point where you can play poorly, play off, maybe play your C game in this rivalry and still win. Again, I'm going to go back to this timestamp here. Georgia has its fourth straight win in this series. That hasn't happened since 1983. Sure, there's a lot of zits on this one, folks, no doubt about it. But Georgia moves on. Georgia's 34-20 win. There's a lot of times, Brandon, I don't know how you felt, that Georgia played pretty well in this game and they lost. And it was a long way back to Clark County. It was a long way back to Georgia. Georgia kind of found a way to move on.
All right, so let's transition here, cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. For a moment, I'm going to keep this quick. First of all, South Carolina up pretty sizably over Texas A&M right now. Midway second quarter, 17-6. Gamecocks have the lead. Also, a early surprise here. Kentucky leads Tennessee 7-0. But the real point I wanted to make, cruising around the SEC, statement performance from Ole Miss. The next opponent for Georgia goes into Fayetteville today, hangs a huge number on Arkansas. Taylor Green, the Arkansas quarterback, does battle injury a bit in that game today, but that doesn't explain the fact that Arkansas, I mean, should say that Ole Miss racked up point after point after point. And, you know, if you thought that Ole Miss was going to tap out on the season and, you know, perhaps look for a soft spot to land here, not necessarily the case. Ole Miss comes in next Saturday with a good bit of steam to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. Dangerous opponent for Georgia. Many expected that would be the case. Obviously, it appears that's going to be true in Oxford next Saturday afternoon.
So here's what I feel about this game, Brandon. the way Carson and the offense has played, Georgia looks wounded. Georgia looks vulnerable. What happened the last time Georgia looked wounded and vulnerable? They answered the bell against Texas. That's what you got to feel like Georgia has in them moving forward, heading into Oxford next week.
All right, so that is Cruise Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. You just heard Isha say he's going to be a part of our DawgNation cruise. We want you all to be there, be a part of that with us. Jessica Slater, great travel agent. She can help you out with that. Find her online. You can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. There's also a number on your screen. You can call that and be a part of our DawgNation cruise. So many folks having a good time. Always a lot of fun, and anything. As Aisha said, he's got 3 Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations coming up here in 2025, so a lot of you looking forward to doing that too, whether it's Icon of the Seas, Utopia of the Seas, any of the other great ships. Royal Caribbean really redefining what the cruise vacation experience is all about, including this upcoming April. We set sail on Utopia of the Seas, the newest of all the Royal Caribbean cruise ships. Can't wait to see you for that. Jessica Slater is going to help you get ready to go on it. Email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com for more on that. Jeff, good stuff. Thanks for your appearance here tonight.
Quick question. I want you to get in the habit of repeating this on this program. Where does this take the Gator Hater number 2 now? Where's the Gator Hater countdown to? Where is it going to go?
Yeah, listen, we're going to be going 1,500 and then beyond. We're already at
1,500.
Well, we're at 14. I think we're 1456 tonight, 1456, I believe. And so we're going to keep on climbing over and over and over again, because a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. That is as true as it's ever been before. It feels great tonight, Jeff. We appreciate you being a part of it with us. Always a lot of fun. 1456, I am confirming that. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia, and you love that if you're a Gator hater here tonight. Kaylee Manziel loves it too. We're going to hear from Kaylee coming up in a moment, but prior to that, what did Georgia coach Kirby Smart have to say about a win tonight against Florida that perhaps left some room for concern and certainly plenty of room for improvement? Here is the Georgia coach speaking to the media in Jacksonville from the bowels of Everbank Stadium just a couple of minutes ago.
We'll just take some questions. All right. Ooh. That was a tough one, guys. We didn't play our best game. I thought maybe the difference in the game obviously was the second half. The difference in the game was our fans gave us some momentum, gave us some energy there, had some big defensive stops. Obviously, you cannot turn the ball over and beat good teams. And make no mistake about it, Florida's a much improved team. I told Billy before the game, they're playing really well, playing really good football, and have been for 4 or 5 weeks now. They've avoided turnovers, and they've run the ball well. The recipe for winning football is don't turn the ball over, run the ball, and play good defense. And for the most part, we've done that most of the year. We didn't do that for a little bit of the half. We dominated most of the field position, most of the stats in terms of yards, but we all know turnovers. And some of those are on Carson, some of them aren't, and we got to do a good job helping him because when he's needed to play well and we needed him to step up, once again tonight, backed up, 3rd down, and I don't know what it was, 3rd and 5 maybe. He made plays. He did a great job. Can y'all keep that door shut, please? Thank you.
Coach, how can y'all help Carson more to be more consistent?
Well, I mean, he did some really good things. And there's things that go unnoticed. What he can't do is throw the ball late over the middle. And we got to do a better job protecting him. He got hit one time and the ball went up in the air. But the 2 plays that he would want back were late scramble, throw it up plays. And to be honest with you, he hasn't done that much. You know, he's always been smart. He'll take off and run or just throw it away and live for another day. Thought he pressed on those 2 plays, but he also made some really good plays. And we got to do a good job helping him around with the run game. And, you know, we lost ETN. It made it a lot tougher because we didn't have as many backs. And he relies on ETN to take some of that pressure off in the run game.
So you hear from Kirby Smart right there, kind of coaching 101, obviously acknowledging some of the interceptions from Carson, and yet not going to do anything publicly that would run the risk of diminishing the confidence this team has in its starting quarterback. That's just what coaches do. I think there's probably a portion of Georgia fans that would like for Kirby on a night like this to maybe be a little bit more forthcoming. Kirby did say, obviously, you can't have turnovers like that, pointing the finger on, as he says, some of those turnovers on Carson, but at the same time, still trying to balance the criticism with some compliments. You know, that's just what coaches do, and Kirby Smart is a coach at his core. Kaylee Manziel, by the way, joins us now.
And I understand that, but there's also moments that you see on the sidelines of him getting after other players, so I can understand why DawgNation is a little bit upset with this. I mean, I just think the performance overall...
It's a quarterback privilege?
It looks like it. I know what I see, and I understand, because I do think that maybe the mental side of the game is something that Carson struggles a lot with, and as a coach, you know your players better than anyone, and maybe he just doesn't respond to that well, and that's why a lot of it's kept behind doors. But when your defense is playing like that and it's your offense that's consistently creating opportunities for the other team to score, it's really disappointing. And it's evident that he's just not seeing the field the same. If anything, he looks a little bit distracted. So if he is going to punish him behind closed doors, that's what you have to do as a coach, but it definitely needs to happen.
You also heard Kirby say he complimented Billy Napier for the turnaround that he believes that Florida's undergoing right now. We'll see how long that turnaround lasts, but you also had a chance to spend some time with Billy Napier here a moment ago for his own press conference. Always interesting to hear what these coaches say after a game against Georgia. What did Billy Napier say tonight about this one?
There were 3 takeaways from this. Number one, they talked a lot about the injury aspect of the game. It did feel like every single down somebody else was getting injured, but he did talk about how that's just a thing in college football, and you can't really look to that to blame on the outcome of the game. I've been so excited to tell you this.
Really?
Would you believe me if I told you it was Billy Napier versus the water bottle part 2?
Oh, he could not get the bottle open again?
Different scenario. So I noticed what he does is he takes a sip of water between every question. And so there's his drinking water bottle, and then there's the water bottle like the Dasani that they have for
kind of like the prop for the sponsor.
Ad placement. Yeah. Well, he after like question 2 or 3, you can go watch the press conference on our DawgNation YouTube channel, but he puts his water bottle down, and then it starts rolling off the podium, and it knocks the other one off.
Oh my gosh.
I immediately thought to myself, I was like, I cannot wait to tell Braden about it. It was glorious. It was perfect. You heard a little giggle in the room.
Another water bottle snafu, if you want to say it that way, for Billy Napier. That makes me very, very happy.
I've got one more thing. I think that this was the biggest surprise for me, is Billy Napier saying that this was the first time he actually thought his team could beat Georgia. And like I respect the honesty, but at the same time, if you're your players, if you're the Florida fan base, that's not what you want to hear out of your coach. Even when I listened to the Mississippi State head coach a few weeks ago, he said we come into every game expecting to win it. And yeah, that might seem a little outrageous because they're Mississippi State, but you know what? Good for you for doubling down on your team and your players and their expectations. So to hear Billy Napier say that, if I'm a Florida fan or if I'm one of the players, I'm disappointed by that, because even when you come into a game like this where you're playing the number 2 team in the country, you're still supposed to believe that your team is going to win each and every game. So an honest answer from him, but if I'm in anywhere near this Florida program, that's a really disappointing answer to me.
Well, I'll tell you what it reminds me of, and after this we'll get ready to wrap up here tonight. And by the way, you'll get a chance to see some of Billy Napier right there on the screen. But what this reminds me of is going back to 2018 when Dan Mullen was here as the Florida coach. You know, they lost by 19 points to Georgia in the 2018 game. The following year, they lost, 7 points, something like that. And that post-game press conference back in 2019, Dan Mullen was asked about, what do you think the gap is between you and Georgia? And he said it's, 7 points, whatever the number was, a single-digit number, whatever it was. He says the gap's 7 points. The gap is how X number of points, however many it was. And that did not sit well with a lot of Florida fans that night. And we obviously made fun of him on that on DawgNation Daily, of course, too. And I think history proves that Mullen was wrong about that, because he may have thought the gap between he and George was only about a touchdown in 2019, but 2 years later he'd be getting hired as a TV analyst because he got fired as the Florida football coach. And so for Billy Napier to say, this was the first time tonight I thought we really could beat Georgia, well, the truth is, the next step and all of that is a doozy. Okay, yeah, tonight, after a handful of turnovers, you get a chance to stay competitive for 60 minutes. You get some credit for that. Still lost by 2 touchdowns, but you were competitive for most of the game. But the difference between playing close and actually winning a game is a pretty substantial next step. And Dan Mullen thought as a coach he was going to take that. Obviously didn't. And Billy Napier may find that next step is also really difficult for him here tonight too. So sounds like he's going to wrap himself in the glory of a moral victory. We'll allow him to do that. And on Monday we'll be making fun of him for having a water bottle issue.
Yeah, that's definitely what it sounded like, was a moral victory. But, I mean, the water bottle moment, that's the one that I'm going to remember the most from this entire thing.
All right, Kaylee, good stuff. Now, listen, Kaylee you talk about what she's doing for DawgNation. DawgNation in terms of like putting herself out there, getting sunburned out there doing the game day pregame show, getting sunburned out there, and or really just putting it all on the line for DawgNation each and every game day. We certainly appreciate that. Also, a lot of folks, Jack and obviously our buddy Jay, back in our studios working late here tonight and making sure all the stuff happens on the air here. We certainly appreciate that. And Danny's here tonight there too. You appreciate that from him. Always glad to have him a part of what we're doing here. If you want to go to the DawgNation YouTube page, we try to play the Carson Beck for you. You'll see the Beck press conference in its entirety, the entirety of the Kirby Smart press conference too. If you joined us here live late, you can go back to YouTube and watch this again from the very beginning. Any of the, of course, platforms on demand, that's there for you. Read all the great stuff at DawgNation.com as well. And, of course, I'll see you Monday back in our studios again, counting the days. More happiness about Georgia winning against Florida, but also room for some concern about what might be happening with Carson Beck and this Georgia offense. We got room and space to do both, and so that's what we're going to do. Gator haters rejoice. Georgia beats Florida again. Thank you for being a part of our DawgNation postgame show. 1,456 days. That is how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. And you better believe we're going to enjoy watching that number keep on climbing. Have a great weekend, everybody.